Our featured NIC Talks speaker is Mike Townsend, founder and chief operating officer of HomeHero. Mr. Townsend's talk is titled, Creating a Caregiving Economy, $1 million by 2026. Ladies and gentlemen, Mike Townsend.
So 65 million people make up 30% of the US adult population today that takes care of someone who is ill, disabled, or elderly. And the numbers are staggering. 45 to 65-year-olds today will increase 1% over the next 20 years, while those 80 and older will increase 80%. Basically, all those people in 1945 who came back from the war had a tsunami of babies, and now they need an army of caregivers to help them through the aging process. And most people would agree this is one of the largest problems our country is facing today. But I don't quite see it as a problem as much as I see it as an opportunity. An opportunity because I see the light at the end of the tunnel and how we can potentially solve this. So here's a visual put out by AARP recently that shows the declining slope of the ratio of caregivers to those receiving care. As you can see, it's a pretty severe drop. And it's a pretty large-scale problem. And it's one that, if not addressed soon, will result in massive costs and pain for our senior population down the road. So the question is, why the imbalance? If we truly have a free market and we have a massive demand, why wouldn't you expect the supply to grow as well? Well, I believe there's a few factors that attribute for this, but it's important to break each one down to truly understand it. You have effects such as people are living longer, children are living farther away than ever before, and families are having less children per household. But that doesn't really answer the question of why aren't there this massive supply of caregivers excited to get into the market to take care of these seniors. And I believe the problem is twofold. It's one, the perception of caregivers by society, and the second, the actual experience of working as a caregiver. So what's it like today? Life as a caregiver is not so great. Most of these people are immigrants from other countries, or they're faithfully motivated to give back to the needy. They're generally not overly proud, and they don't recruit a lot of their friends to the profession. There's not much of a career ladder. You kind of work day in, day out with a family. No one sees your hard work. There's not a boss over your shoulder to pat you on the back. You don't receive praise. There's no networking events like this. There's no LinkedIn. There's no reviews. On average, they'll start at $9 an hour, minimum wage, slightly go up from that. You'll get pulled in to emergency situations spontaneously. It's really rough. The emotional toll is extremely high. Imagine you working day in, day out, going to someone's home in the last few months or years of their life, helping them build an intense bond with them, witnessing them pass away, and then immediately have to go out and find your next job. It's tough. It's really, really hard. And many of these caregivers struggle, even the best ones, to get their next client. They'll interview 5 or 6 times over the course of a few months or weeks. Here's an example of something that just truly resonates with me. Senior home care is one of the most overlooked industries by any measure of technological infrastructure. In California and throughout the West Coast, the largest union has over 300,000 members, and these are caregivers. And typically, they'll work every 2 weeks. They'll submit a paper timesheet, fill it out, mail it in to this factory in Chico, California that has 25 people that process every one of these timesheets. And 3% of them, they can't read your handwriting, so they send it back to you, and you don't get paid for another 19 days. And this is an example of a story that happened in June. A LA post office mishap where I believe a mail truck caught fire, and 40,000 timesheets went missing. So as state workers scrambled to organize the chaos, 40,000 people went unpaid. And these are people in the lowest income demographic. They couldn't afford food, basic rent. It was really a struggle. And this is only one example to show you what it's like, what the industry is really like behind the scenes. Now, on the left is Anthony Hill. Anthony is a professor at Ohio State. And in May of 2013, he was interviewing caregivers for his 98-year-old mother living in Seattle. He couldn't afford the $400-something a day that agencies were charging, so he was relying on some friends in the city to interview caregivers. He started pulling in his son, Kyle, there with the process. Kyle and I were living together in San Francisco, working on a mobile payment startup, working 100 hours a week, desperately trying to get our startup off the ground. And they interviewed 12 people up in Seattle. They finally found one they liked. Then the process of managing them, paying them, figuring out what they do while they're in the home began. And boy, it was a struggle. They were mailing checks back and forth from Ohio to Seattle. And eventually, Anthony got the unfortunate news that the caregiver they found they loved stopped showing up and stole a handful of jewelry from the mother. As you can imagine, this was extremely frustrating and violating for the family. And I was right there with him. You know, I was living with Kai, felt the pain along with them. And now they had to start from scratch. So Anthony left his job as a professor at Ohio State, moved to Seattle to really take over this process again. And me being an engineer, Kyle a designer, we really felt compelled to try and solve this problem using technology. Could we build a better system for payments and scheduling and interviewing? And we really felt like we could. And we felt like that was the future. So we took some time away from our startup, and we dedicated ourselves to building a really simple app for the caregivers to check in, check out of shifts, and send payments via SMS. And just this little injection of technology completely changed Anthony, his mother, and the caregivers' lives. Anthony went back to Ohio State to become a teacher again. And after this experience, Kyle and I were sitting there and felt so motivated to take what we built, expand upon it, and bring that experience to millions more families across the country and world who are also experiencing these problems. So we realized we didn't know anything about home care. And we dove in. We spoke with caregivers, we went to hospital discharge planners, we went to meetups, we did everything we could to learn about the industry. And before we wrote any lines of code or built anything, we had a pretty good sense of the things that matter to people. We knew that attracting, screening, and managing caregivers is going to be key to success. Not just caregivers, but quality caregivers. So I personally, as I stand here, am an Uber driver, Lyft, Postmates, and just about every other on-demand marketplace company provider you can be. And I went through all of these onboarding processes to learn the ins and outs, the subtleties of each, and how companies screen their suppliers, and what makes good ones and bad ones. And we took all that learning, and we combined it with all the problems that we understood in home care to make what we think is the future of finding home care at HomeHero. So today, our company, HomeHero, has 30 employees. We recently raised $23 million from the top tech healthcare investors in the world. And with over 1,500 heroes, as we call them, we recently hit 1 million hours of care, which is a major milestone for us internally. And I truly believe this is the beginning. We can take this experience and bring it to people all across the world. But it's important to note that HomeHero is really just a small part of a major economic shift. Already today, Uber and Lyft have raised over $10 billion and completely reshaped and redefined the transportation industry, and generally what we think of when we think of a taxi cab driver. I personally rent out my apartment on Airbnb. I order food on Postmates. I rent my car out on GetAround. And it just shows you the 40-plus marketplaces that are available in over 10 major markets in the US is going to quickly grow. As consumers are shifting their mindset from buy first off the shelf to now rent first and exchange with people in marketplaces, every category, if you go on Craigslist, every category is being replaced by a billion-dollar marketplace or service. And home care is going to be no exception. So literally, if you stop and think and you imagine a better consumer experience, it will probably exist, and it will probably disrupt a major industry along the way. And the effect already is huge. In this country alone, over 1 million people participate in these marketplaces and services, which has already helped to reduce waste, improve our country's GDP, and build bonds between people and local communities. So the question is, why now? And what has happened? Well, as we all sit here with smartphones in our pockets, that's the answer. The technology in our phones allows companies like ours to aggregate a huge supply of people and distribute jobs based on distance, skills, rates, and many other criteria to find the absolute fastest and best possible match. This in turn reduces overhead costs, which we pass on savings to the family and increase wages to the suppliers. So instead of having a 2-week turnaround time to get paid, you can get paid instantaneously. Instead of filling out paper timesheets, you can check in and check out of an app. This is what we look like today. But what does the future hold? That's most exciting. So HomeHero and many other marketplaces will evolve from a simple platform to connect and manage work to an intelligent distribution network where the suppliers are educated professionals and they can refer services that haven't even been invented yet. One of my favorite examples, I love this story, is a company called Propeller Health. They built a little Bluetooth chip that sits on top of the asthma inhaler, a couple guys out of Stanford, and it connects to the cloud, connects to weather.com's API, and it knows everyone else around you who also uses this. And when other people start to get asthma attacks, it notifies you ahead of time, so you can preemptively prevent getting an asthma attack. Makes a lot of sense. Their biggest challenge was, how do we distribute to consumers? Now, through companies like HomeHero, we have an educated workforce. We can refer these directly to consumers who will most likely benefit from the service. And there'll be many, many more innovative, disruptive hardware companies down the road. We can broaden the scope of what caregivers do. We can increase the perception of what they do, and we can generally make the experience of becoming a caregiver much, much better. Now, if we're successful, which I hope we are, we'll be able to attract millions more people to the caregiving profession and hopefully solve our senior generation problem by 2026. Thank you.